Quantifier. Importing sections. In this video you will learn about using the import canvas. This is a great way to speed up estimation activities. The canvas is where experienced estimators do most of their initial work within Quantifier. Specific focus is given to importing a client file, using a blank canvas and some of the key features of the tool. To start using the canvas, click the Quantifier logo to access the main menu and then click on Import Section List. You are prompted as to whether you want to start with a file or with a blank canvas. Let's start with a file that a client has given to us. Browse to find the file and click Open to load it. We can now see the canvas. Let's review the layout on screen. The content of the file is shown from the second column onwards. The first column is reserved for Quantifier's matched profiles. The dark gray section at the top holds the column headers and units. The units can be modified by the user as desired. In this example, the software has automatically detected the column headers based on the content of the file. We can verify this by clicking on Edit Columns. If the auto-detection hasn't identified the columns directly, then they can be modified using this form. Let's add in a column to be used for comments. Quantifier assumes the next unused column, but this can be changed by the user if required. Let's also tick the box at the top to request that the profile designation is to be imported as the client reference on the MTO Builder page. Now let's look at the Quantifier section matching. A green background indicates that Quantifier is confident that it has found the profile designation within the loaded steel library. However, we can see that for a lot of sections it is returning no match found. This is because in this instance, the client file doesn't have serial section identifiers at the start of all designations. Let's open the profile matching form. This form gives you control as to how Quantifier treats the defined profile designations. We can specify which serial sections to consider and for custom sections, what abbreviation to look for at the start of profile names. For our scenario, we need to tick the box to tell Quantifier to search through all loaded serial sections but to not force a match against a specific serial category. When we click on Match Sections, we can see that the vast majority of sections are now showing as green. There are two sections colored yellow. This indicates that the software is not confident that a section has been found properly and requires the user to check. For these sections, the client has likely mistyped the profile designation, since no serial section of this size exists. Let's replace it with what we suspect it should be. Clicking on the relevant section in the column brings up a section dialog box. Let's start to type what we think it might be. It is likely that it should be AUB 457 152 74 74. When we click Insert, the software will replace all the same designations with this new section. If we wish, we might manually add a comment to notify the client that a change has been made. If we had a very long list of sections, we might have chosen at the start to consolidate them into a more manageable list. The user has a number of options to do this. Fundamentally, the software will group similar sections and determine the overall total length, area, or weight accordingly. We are now ready to import to the MTO Builder. By default, Quantifier treats the length dimension as being dominant. In other words, for this example, the area defined by the client would be ignored and the surface area and steel weight would be calculated directly by the software based on the inbuilt section dimensions. If we wanted to use the client's surface area as the basis for the estimate, then we can tick here to use the canvas areas. A further box now asks us whether we want to convert beam areas from 4-sided to 3 sides automatically. This is useful since areas, typically from fabrication software outputs, are often provided based on 4-sided exposure, but there is actually a concrete slab or a steel grating on the top flange. For this example, we will use the length for the estimate, but we will indicate that the values provided are total lengths and not individual section lengths. We also need to specify that the zone names are not given in row headers but are defined on each line. Since there were no critical temperatures defined in the client file, we are now asked to define them. They can be defined in different ways, but let's set it as a constant value of 500 degrees Celsius for all sections. The imported list is now shown on the MTO Builder display. Quantifire has sorted into the zones for easy interpretation. The overall length is 10,350 meters and the surface area is 13,097 square meters. We can cross-check this against the values on the import canvas. We can see that the length is exactly the same. The area is slightly higher at 14,386 square meters. This is due to the aforementioned 4-sided to 3-sided automatic modification. If we display the comments and the client reference, then we can see that these have also been imported. They can subsequently be used on the output report as desired. Let's clear this estimate and consider working with a blank canvas. The absolute minimum information that Quantifire needs to be able to import is a section profile designation. Let's set it as column D. We'll enter a universal beam designation. Now let's import it. The section is placed into the currently selected zone. In the absence of further information, Quantifire uses preset definitions for certain sections. For a universal beam in this case, it assumes 3-sided exposure and a quantity of 1. The length of 6 meters is based on the default beam length in the settings. These attributes can always be changed using the editing tools. Let's go back to the canvas and look at different ways to enter sections. We can set the profile designation to span across multiple consecutive columns. For example, C and D. Quantifire will combine the contents of the columns before trying to match the profile. We can add some zones to aid clarity. Let's look at some different ways to enter the same section. For these section types, Quantifire is able to identify the relevant section. What about an HEA designation? These are often denoted in industry in different formats. Again, Quantifire finds the section for each definition. What about a fabricated I section? Let's consider a 600 deep, 200 wide section with a web of 12 and flanges of 20 mm. We need to ensure that it's denoted with text at the start to tell Quantifire the section type. Let's set it as PG for plate girder. Now Quantifire matches it and notes it as a custom section. If the client had used their own prefix, then we can add that to the list of text associated with the section, and it will be matched. What if the client used a notation that put the flange thickness first and the web last? Quantifire always assumes the minimum dimension to be the web. Of course, if the minimum dimension was actually the flange, then it could be input manually as a custom section. How about an asymmetric section with different size top and bottom flanges? The software recognizes the additional dimensions in the context of an I section. The canvas can also be used for beams with web openings. Ensure that a prefix relevant to cell beams is adopted and enter the dimensions similar to an I section. Quantifire displays the cell beam notation it needs to adopt, including the web and flange section factors. On import, it will assign the opening geometry based on the defaults in the settings. Other cell beam notation can be used on the canvas. Hollow profiles work in a very similar fashion. Concrete fill tubes can also be defined. Be sure to align the prefix text accordingly. We can now import these sections to the estimate. Note how Quantifire has assumed, based on the section type, the use, the sides exposed and the length. If we go back to the canvas, we can add more columns and input additional data. Let's add in some other fire resistance periods, quantities, lengths, and critical temperatures. When we import it this time, all our changes are brought across. This concludes the import tutorial. We hope that it's provided you with an overview of how to deal with client files and has helped to guide you in undertaking an estimation project where the canvas can be used. Full information on importing is given in the Quantifire User Guide and the Import Quick Start Guide. Look out for other topics in other training videos, including cellular beam assessments, critical temperature analysis, and automated structural fire optimization.